Morning, Kåre. Welcome back to this video value creation in life sciences series number 62. Why don't we jump with your introduction and then we can take questions.
Sure, that would be great. And thanks for having me here, Sarup. Pleasure to be here. Yeah.
So a quick introduction about what you do at BII.
Certainly, you could say I'm working as an entrepreneur in residence, helping the Bio Studio, which is part of the BII, based on grants incoming from academics, and build it up to investable companies.
Interesting. So, Kåre, you have worked actually earlier as a CEO of Amniotics, which is, of course, biotechs are always early stages. But here now you are very early stage, I would say. So in terms of making certain decisions, especially on choosing the investable assets, making it investable, as you said, right? What are the very important characteristics you see while making this decision, which you think are very important at this stage? And what difference you see when you compare it with the stage when you were the CEO at Amniotics?
As you're quite right, and you could say the project I'm working with primarily at BII is a tech bio concept and single cell metabolomics, and using that whole platform to look at metabolic mode of actions. So in that sense, it's somewhat different than my previous company, Amniotics, where I was developing a clear therapeutic product based on stem cells. So from the investable side of view, it's somewhat different because you could say the tech bio space, we do not necessarily have a drug per se in that sense. So the investability part here is about showing that there is an interest and uptake by potential farmers and collaborators. So it's about generating interest with contacts and farmers and collaborators, and get that, you could say, input from them on that, how it looks like.
Right. So so I understand that particular point. So if you choose, let's say you, of course, might have to go through a certain process to choose that, okay, this is the project we think that it has a higher probability of getting invested, right? What are the top three, for example, criteria you think that are, because, there could be several criteria, but, as you might understand, there will be 3 to 4 that really explains that, okay, these 2 to 3 parameters, if I get it right, then I think, this is the project I should be choosing it.
Yeah, and you're quite right. And I think that's often, you could say, where one sits and discuss and strategically try to line out where does this technology or platform or product, where does it fit in? What is the strategy behind this? Where do we find the best market fit for this? So when it comes to the investability part, it's about, do we bring something unique to the table, or do we bring something that is extra? What is the added value we bring to the table when it comes to this? Which I think you could say is also very often, sometimes you discuss over and over, and really get in sync with what is the added value you bring to that, because in essence that's what you're selling, in added value. And then it's about establishing these collaborations with potential takers of the technology. Users of the technology. So you have these first user cases and can work with them. And you could say sometimes it can be pharma companies, sometimes it can be key opinion leaders in the field, you could say, well-known academic centers, or someone else who can give you additional input on where you are and your development, and where there's a big need for your technology.
Right. So now let's get into a very general question and nothing related to BII. But I understand that BII is something, and please correct me if I'm wrong, something like Y Combinator in tech, right? What they're trying to build is to kind of choose great projects, that could. So to understand let's say BII is successful in becoming that Y Combinator thing, for example. Okay. What are the things that you see in any country, or in order to develop another Y Combinator kind of? What are the elements you think are necessary in any country to do that? For example, today Spain wants to have another set of kind of a Y Combinator, right? That does similar kind of things that BII is doing, for example. Definitely, there has to be different dots that need to be kind of combined together to do that. What are those dots or important dots that you see is very important so that, you know, we get a lot of more innovations, more R&D productivity, more funding, and so on.
I think what you really need to think about, of course, you need to have some sort of investors, so you have an investor community around it, so the successful parts can be funded. Then it's about creating an entrepreneurial environment, and bringing in people who have been entrepreneurs and developed products in different spaces, and have them being part of it, pitching in. So bringing together people with different mindsets into this. So you could say technology can flourish, and we can, you could say, fertilize different projects per se. Of course, but still, of course, creating an environment where we help each other, but also each come out with their own IP and development of the IP. So I think it's about creating that mixture of different things that comes to money, of course, people as well, and then of course technology or innovations. So people come with their brilliant ideas.
Do you also consider that, you know, for any country to succeed in these kind of models, a university system is solid university is also required, where you could have a lot of research that is being happening, and then you have also an ecosystem of investors that also need to thrive, you know, because both cannot you know, stand alone, right? You know, they need, you know, mutual and to have a solid university, then you need a lot of funding also for that particular research, actually. So do you think that, you know, does Denmark have that advantage of having let's say better universities than other, or is it like because BII is funded by Novo that has the muscle money power to kind of establish it? That also was a key element in kind of forming BII.
I think Denmark has quite strong academic situations, both from the university parts, and you could say the classical universities, also the technical university, and then combining also with a high level of clinical research. So you have this mixture of clinical research, academic or more classical academic university research, and technology research, and combining that across brings you into somewhat almost like a Kindle Square structure close by each other, where we can easily go over and knock on the door and say, hey, can you help me out here? Then it's of course about also an openness to share and discuss and be willing to do that. So I think that's also about it. So you could say we can always be afraid that someone will take our IP or steal our IP. So it's also something about sometimes that you have the confidence that actually you can talk to people without being too afraid that they'll run away with your idea right away. So it's also about, you could say, some of that. I think is important.
Absolutely. I think, you know, this point is also raised many a times in the entrepreneurial community about sharing the ideas, because I think the biggest part is the execution, which is very, very hard, and which I think is 80 to 90% of the work. You know, 10% is of course the idea. So I think before sharing, I think it's also important to understand with whom you are sharing, whether that particular person has the capability to kind of execute and, you know, replicate and get into the market, for example, right? Imagine if you have an interesting idea and without any NDA you are sharing with, you know, some large pharma, for example, you know, maybe then you might be careful that, you know, they do have the resources and capabilities, everything to kind of replicate, right?
Yeah. And sometimes you could say, I have a sense, at least sometimes, that people are so afraid of sharing that you end up sitting and discussing an NDA for these. And it's like, why? Couldn't we just make sure that the information you get or I give away is not enough for you to come up with a you could say, competition? So sometimes about figuring out what is it really I give away? Is it something that someone else can really use or not? Before we start having all of these NDA discussions, it can take forever.
Absolutely, completely agree with you. Let's get into some discussion on the talent management, because I think, having a right talent is, I think, very, very important for any early stage company. So while you were at Amniotics, did you have a kind of a principle or a thought about, that, okay, the next person that I'm going to hire has to be XYZ, or what points you have in your mind that you think are relevant for these early stage biotech companies when they hire?
I think it's a good point, because in the essence, you could say you can have different products moving or developments in early biotech. So it's of course very important to think about the people and the know-how that's always combined with the people you have. So the risk is of course that you have people leaving, and then you will lose that know-how and those connections they have, and so you're building on people. So I think it's super important and very valid point. Personally, my focus was very much making sure that I had a sense that the people I hired in were you could say able to grow with the company. So there were, you could say, they had some skills, of course, to come in and being part of the company and feeling the teamwork and feeling that they were a good fit for the team, but also that they could grow in the position. So there was more for them to stay with us, because otherwise you end up in a situation where it's about paying the high salaries and giving away a lot of equity and all of that, and then you come into that. And that's not necessarily the way you want to play it early on. Early on, you want to bring in people who want to stay with you, feel that they can grow with the company, and of course, be incentivized also by being part of a growing company. It gives a whole different feeling to you as a worker than working for big corporate, because now you can really be part of the growth journey.
So perfect. So let's now turn this question to, let's say, about the CEOs of biotech company. So, I'm not trying to, let's say, judge any CEO by how successful they are in launching the products, because we know we are in a failure business, right? So most of it fails. So I don't consider failure of a product as a failure for the CEOs. But my point is that, what makes a good biotech CEO, in your opinion? It could be a generic, but I know it's a broad, but
yeah, a generic consideration. I think one is communication. I think it's very important that you can communicate, because in essence, that's what you'll do both with your team, with investors, and coming around with the narrative and the story for the company. I think that's very important. Then I also think it's good that you understand, not needing to you could say be subject matter expert, because I think there's a risk that if you're subject matter expert, you're not good at delegating. You risk sitting down there and second guess what other people are doing. So that's not necessarily a good thing to do. But I think it's somewhat good to have at least some sort of understanding of the different areas across the business, because if you have that, you can start having the discussions and meetings and coachings around that and developing that. So I think it's good to have a generalized understanding of the technology or product or space you're working in. Then it's about communication, and then of course being a good manager or leader, people leader, so people will follow you, because in the essence that's what you need people to do in the early stage companies. You need to be able to come across as being trustworthy, and that people will follow you because they are also taking a risk by joining your company.
Right. So how do you consider, let's say, this characteristics of delegating well do you consider it to be a very important trend? Because based on my particular opinion, being quick and decisive, I think also a very important trait, because it moves the things faster. Because as you know, in biotech, there are tons of things to do, right? CMC, regulatory, this and that, right? And most of the time, if you do not delegate, then you tend to go very slow, right? But sometimes it's very hard for founders to delegate. That's I have seen, because they would like, if they were attending, let's say, all meetings when they just started it, but after 5 years, when they are big, they have this one, they still would like to kind of get into, or get into all the meetings, to make, and that I have seen really slowed the process actually. What is your point on that?
I think that's what I've seen as well for many areas, that the CEOs are focusing too much on, and that's actually coming back to my previous point, that if you're a subject matter expert, sometimes there's a risk if you're not confident about it, or you could say, seeing it, there's a risk that you go in and think, yes, this is what I do well, because this is what I've done in the past life for so much time. So now I go in and do this and feel that this is where I accomplish stuff. But that's not the space you want to be in, because, as you said, you need to delegate, because otherwise your execution space will be slow. You need to execute, and you need to do it as quickly as possible. Sometimes, of course, you need to step back and say, maybe we should take a breather now and figure out, are we on the right track? But overall, I think the biggest risk for many companies is that they're not executing. Sometimes that can be because they haven't raised enough funds, because that can, of course, also sometimes come back and bite you, is that if you haven't raised enough, you can't execute. You can't do what you were thinking you had to do. And I think we're both on the same point, saying that in the essence, an asset has a value when it reaches the market, which is the reason why you need to execute and you need to get it to the market as quickly as possible. Because otherwise you're just, you could say, leaving some asset value back.
Absolutely. So can you share in your learnings, right, from you worked in large pharma to, let's say, as a CEO of amniotics to here, what are the important learnings that you had that you think you should, or you would like to share with your friends or friend CEOs, that you think either you might have learned yourself in the process, or you made the mistake of not doing it, and so on? Are there any 2 or 3 points that you'd like to share on that?
I think some of the points is that when you work in big corporates, being big pharma or medtech or wherever it is, there's a tendency that you're part of the puzzle. So you need to fit in to that kind of specific room, and you need to execute in that particular space. While when you are in small startups or early scale-ups, you need really to also see, can I help some of my other team members if they're falling behind in the speed and execution? You need to be able to look up and take a more open mind to what's going on, because you are part of a small team that needs to execute. So I think that's one of the big learnings that's coming from having been big corporate, where sometimes it's super clear what you need to do, and this is what we do, and that's where it is. While sometimes when you move to startup or scale up, you're in a situation where, yes, I did my part now, but the next one in line may not have done his or hers, because you're a small team of fewer people, and I need to be open to lend a hand and give a hand.
Right. So let's now, say, as we are now running out of time, maybe I would put it as a last question. A biotech company has, so that moves from being a private, and then many of them decide to go public as well, right, as a way of funding. Now, it is true that I hear many a times the story that, IPO is just a way of raising money, which is technically true. Okay, you are just raising money from different capital markets. But the inside story also is that, there is also a pressure from the shareholders to get public, so it's not just a way of raising money, it's also a way of perceived exit, I would argue, because I know that, when you just go IPO, you don't get exit immediately, because first of all, your main investors will be locked for 6 months, and there are many other elements, right? Given the market crash and all that has happened, okay, have you introspected that when is the right time for a biotech company to go public, and should they go at all, or they focus on rather science and increase their visibility through very strong BD activities by attending congresses and so on? What's your thought on this?
I think it's one of those discussions we have over and over. Should we go public or not? Should we stay private or not? What is the right time or not? I personally, I would say there's a difference, of course, between biotech, medtech, diagnostics, tech bio. So there are different areas that one needs to consider when it comes to that. But I think what's very important is to understand that when you really need to consider, should I go for an IPO, it comes with some restrictions, financial restrictions. You need to make sure you have quarterly reports, all of that set up, that you're doing it all right by the books. And then you could say you need to have laid out a news flow. You need to have laid out that you have a continuously news flow so people can learn about your company. So whether it's good or bad or going public, sometimes I would say actually it's good, because at least it makes sure that the company gets everything in check, knows what's going on. There's a tendency sometimes that if the company runs very fast, that they're forgetting to keep track of everything and set everything up. So there's some good points about going public, and certainly you could say there's also a branding value of being public. You certainly have a whole different number of people looking at you, and that is quite beneficial. On the other hand, it also means that some of the things you would prefer to do in the background and not having to publish, suddenly you are pushed to publish, because of course the shareholders need to know.
Right. So, but you also agree that most of the biotech companies after the market crash were thinking that, oh, I wish I was a private company. Right.
Yes. I think many of them were. I think many of them were like, oh, why did we go public now? It was, yeah, it's been very, very tough for many companies that listed in 2021 and 20. So yeah, it's been a tough run for sure.
Super.
And that's always the risk, you could say. If you go in with a super high market cap and it looks very nice, suddenly everyone is like, woohoo, you came in with top market cap. But that can also be quite hard, because can you keep it? Can you keep that share value? You need to make sure that things coming along will show that is the market value that you should have.
So I would like to end this with a very interesting story. Long time ago, maybe 6-7 years ago, I had a discussion with a VC, and I mentioned about this market crash. So as you know, the market was a boom for the past 10 years, right? And this is how the cycle goes in, because these market cycles are a result of our behaviors and emotions. When things go well, everybody jumps on it, and so on. So, and I mentioned to him that, what do you think about this? Do you have any risk management strategy or something about a market crash or something like that? Okay, I don't remember the exact question, but the gist was this. But the interesting part was that his answer was that no, we don't care about this public market crash, because we are a private investor. VC is a private equity investment and so on. And maybe he was humbled by this market crash, but what I saw was that VCs are also human beings, right? And I think in some of the portfolio companies where they invested, and imagine the market cap goes from, I'm just inventing, 500 million to 100 million, it's not nice, and it gives you a lot of pressure, right? So
Yeah.
I think, this is not, this is not to say that, you have to make your decision based on, let's say, planning market crash. No, nobody can predict that, but at least understanding where you are on the market cycle, at least helps you. For example, given where we are in the market cycle right now, I don't think anybody would sit and talk about that, okay, the market will again go maybe 500% down. No. The expectation is that, given that we are already on the ebb, so things are that things should improve, based on, maybe after 10 years down the line, we are in the same situation, right? So
That's
perfect.
right. That's right. And I think what sorry, I think what sometimes people are forgetting that, of course, the private market is also influenced by what's going on in the public market. So you cannot just neglect what's going on with the market caps in the public market if you're a private company. It doesn't work like that. That's somewhat
exactly. Super, Kåre, it was so nice talking to you. I really appreciate your time. Thank you very much, and have a nice day.
Likewise, Sarah.